Welcome back to Yoruba History Channel. We'll be talking about the legend of Moremi and her son and some other stories. Firstly, the legend of Moremi and her son. Moremi was the wife of one of the ancient heroes of Ile-Ife, probably Oromiyan. She was a woman of great beauty and virtue and had an only son named Ella or Olurudo. It happened that the city of Ife was at one time in a state of frequent commotion and unrest, owing to the repeated raids of a tribe of people called the Igbos. This continued for a series of years. The Ifes attributed this affliction and distress to the displayer of their gods, because those that attacked them from the Igbo territory appeared not to be human beings, but gods or demigods. And consequently, the Ifels felt that they could not withstand them, and so these raiders used to make away with easy plunder, including their valuables, with their women and children. For this, they perpetrated and called upon their gods for help, but received no response. Now, this Moremi, fired with zeal and patriotism, was determined to do what she could to free her country from this calamity. She was resolved to find out what these Igbos really were and how to fight them. To this end, she repaired to a stream called Esimere, and then made a vow to the deity thereof that if she was able to carry out her plans, and they proved successful, she would offer to the god the most costly sacrifice she could afford. Her plan was to expose herself to the raiders and get catch, and be taken to their country where she could best learn their secret. But, she said, if I perish, I perish. At the time of the next raid she undertook to carry out her plans, she was caught by the Igbos and taken to their country. And being a woman of great beauty, she was given up amongst others, and sundry booty to their king. Her beauty and virtue soon won her a place in the country, at the confidence of the people. She became familiar with all their customs, and learnt all their secrets. Then she also learned that those who were such object of terror to her people were mere men, who covered themselves from head to foot with acorn grass and bamboo fibers, making them appear extra-human, and are nicknamed Eluyare. She extracted from her husband also the secret of attacking them successfully. If your people know how to make a torch and have the courage to rush amongst them with light torches, they cannot stand that. Moremi, feeling she was now conversant with everything amongst the Igbos, having disarmed any suspicion they may have entertained of her as a captive, suddenly escaped one day to her native land, and by making use of the secret she had learnt, freed her country forever from the raids of the men, once their terror. She told her people that once they come to raid, get your fire set, that they only put on dried bamboos to raid them. As soon as next market day, the Hebrew people came, and afterwards they did as she instructed, pouring sort of oil on them and lighting them up in fire. She repaired to the stream with her offerings of lambs, rams, and goats for sacrifice after the victory. But the god would not accept any of this. She then offered a bullock, which the god also refused to accept. Then she prayed the priest to divine for her what would be acceptable. This was done, and the god demanded of her a holy son. She then gave up her holy son in sacrifice to the gods, in the fulfillment of her vows. The Ife shall be ruled her laws and promised to be to her sons and daughters. for the loss she had sustained for the salvation of her country. Olodo, however, when supposed to be killed, was but half dead. He afterwards revived and rose again, and made a rope with which he climbed up into heaven. And all Ifes to these days have a full hope that he will come again to this world and reap the full reward of his good deeds. We may discern in this legend a confused idea of the story of Jephthah and that of the Blessed Virgin and her son perverted. Oroyan was the father of all Oyos or Yoruba proper, and was the universal conqueror of the land. He left behind him two renowned sons, Ajaka and Sango, both of whom succeeded him in turns, and both of whom became famous in Yoruba history and were deified after death. The Basharan of this reign was Efufun Kofeori. This story is according to what has been written down in a book, The History of the Yoruba. Now to Ajaka, one of the sons of Oroyan. Oba Ajaka was at first only a regent when his father left for Ife, but was subsequently confirmed on the throne as was mentioned above. He alone of all the Yoruba kings had the singular fortune or misfortune of being called to the throne twice, being once deposed but afterwards recalled to the throne. Very little was known of his early reign, except that unlike his father, he was of peaceful disposition, loved husbandry and encouraged it. Being too mean for the warlike spirit of the age, and tamely suffering the encroachment of provincial kings, he was dethroned and went to Idodo, where he remained in retirement 7 years, during which period his brother Sango reigned in his stead. His version was nicknamed Ẹ̀rìndínlógún Àgbọ̀n Kò Ṣeé Dání Ifá, which means 16 coconut is unsuitable for Ifa divination. That is to say, coconuts are not substitute for palm nuts. The reason for this secret is not known. Sango, son of Oroyan and brother of Ajaka, was the fourth king of Yoruba land. He was a very wide disposition, fiery temper, and skillful in sleight of hand tricks. He had a habit of emitting fire and smoke out of his mouth, by which he greatly increased the dread his subjects had of him. The Olowu at this time appeared to have been more powerful than the king of Oyo, for after the death of the uncle Oroyan, he compelled his cousin, the peaceful Ajaka, to pay tribute to him. This was probably the reason why Ajaka was deposed. On Shango's coming to the throne, being a much younger man, the Olowu meant to take advantage of his youth. He demanded the tribute of him, but Sango refused to acknowledge his primacy. Notwithstanding the Olowu's strength to deprive him of his wives and children, consequently his capital was besieged and a sharp fight ensued. Sango there displayed his wonted bravery as well as his tricks. Volumes of smoke issuing from his mouth and nostrils so terrified the Olowu and his army that they became panic-stricken and were completely routed and put to flight. Sango pushed on his advantage, and with every fresh victory, he was the more firmly established on the throne. He thereby became elated and was tyrannical. It was his ambition now to remove the seat of government from Oko to Oyo, then called Oyo Kuru. He knew he would meet with strong opposition from the prince of that city, and so he set upon devising plans by which he could effect his purpose with a little fighting as possible. Sango was now possessed with a desire of performing an act of filial piety. He wished to worship at the grave of his dead mother, but he did not so much as remember her name, for she died when he was but a baby. She was the daughter of Elempe of Nupe king, who formed an alliance with Oronyo by giving him his daughter to wife, of which marriage Sango was the issue. Sango therefore commissioned a Tetu and a Hausa slave to proceed to the Tapa country, to his maternal grandfather Elempe for the purpose, giving them a horse and a cow for the sacrifice. The king's charge to these messengers was that they should listen carefully to the first name uttered in the invocation, which evidently will be his mother's name. The messengers were heartily welcomed and highly entertained by Longme, their king's grandfather, so much so that the Hausa forgot himself and the duty he was charged with. At the time of sacrifice, the priest said at the grave, Torosi Iyagbodo, listen to us. Thy son Sango is come to worship thee. The Tetu noted the name Torosi, but the Hausa, being far from sober, paid no heed to what was said. Therefore, on their return home, the Tetu, who had faithfully carried out his order, was highly rewarded, and the Hausa slave severely punished. The punishment meted out to him was slashed all over his body as a lasting warning for all time. The scars left by this one strangely took the fancy of the king's wife, who thought that they had come lines and beautified by the man, and therefore they advised that in future such marks should not be performed upon a slave, but on actual members of the royal family as distinctive of royalty. Sango took this advice and placed himself first in house of the Olowula named Baba Jegbeosan and Baba Jegbeoru, but he could stand only 2 cuts on each arm and forbade them to proceed any further. This is what is termed Ejo. The marks are to this day retained in the royal family as a distinctive badge of royalty, and hence members of the royal family are termed Akejo. There are 2 broad ribbon marks on the arms from the shoulder to the wrist. While the king had determined upon taking Oyokuro, it occurred to him to employ this as a device by which he could effect his purpose easily without loss of lives. He thereupon sent the Hausa slave to Oloyokuro for him to see how beautiful this slave looks with these marks, and that it has been resolved to use the same as a mark of royalty. He therefore advised the Oloyokuro to submit himself to be thus marked, with his principal sheaves for rank and beauty, stating that he himself had done so. To this they consented. Baba Jegbeosan and Baba Jegbeoru were sent over there, and admirably did they perform their tasks. But on the 3rd day, when the Oloyokuro and his sheaves were very sore, Sango appeared with his force against them. No resistance could be offered, and the city fell easily into his hands. Shamefully and brutally put to death the prince and his chiefs, the dupes of his stratagem. Thus, the seat of government was permanently removed from Oku, or as some would have it, from Ile-Ife to Oyo, the ancient Eyo or Katunga. Sango reigned for 7 years, the whole of which period was marked by his restlessness. He fought many battles and was fond of making charms. He was said to have the knowledge of some preparation by which he could attract lightning, The palace at Oyo was built at the foot of a hill called Ajaka, Ajaka's hill. One day, the king ascended this hill accompanied by his courtiers and some of his slaves, among whom were two favorites, Biri and Omiran. Some of his cousins went with him, but none of his children. He was minded to try the preparation he had in hand. Thinking it might have been damp and useless, he first made the experiment on his own house, but it took effect. A storm was immediately raised and the lightning had struck the palace before they came down the hill, and the buildings were on fire. Many of Shango's wife and his children perished in this catastrophe. Shango, who was the author of his own misfortunes, became alarmed and dismayed at what had happened, and from a broken heart he was resolved to abdicate the throne and retire to the court of his maternal grandfather, Elenwe, king of Nupe. All Oyo was now as chair, not only to sympathize with the king but also to dissuade him from carrying out his resolution. But he could not bear any opposition, and so mad was he that he even used his sword against some of his loyal subjects who ventured to remonstrate with him, and who promised to replace for him his dead wives by others, by whom he might beget children, and so in time to make good his present losses. According to other accounts, he did not abdicate of his own free will, but was asked to do so by a strong party in the state. Both accounts may be true. There may have been two parties for to this day. Yorubas have an abhorrence of a king given to making deadly shams, because for one who already has absolute power invested in him by law, this strange power can only be used spitefully so that no one near him would be safe. He was said to have caused 160 persons to be slain in a fit of anger, of those who were showing much concern and over-anxiety on his behalf, and who would prevent him by force from carrying out his resolve. Thus determined, he set out on his fateful journey with a few followers. Biri, his head slave and favorite, was first to regret the step taken, and to urge on his master to yield the entreaties of those citizens of Oyo, who with all loyalty promised to replace his loss, as far as man can do it, and to rebuild the palace. But finding the king inexorably, he forsook him and returned to the city with all his followers. Omiron likewise followed his example, and the king was thus left alone. He now repented his rashness, especially when he found himself deserted by his favorite Biri. He could not proceed alone, and for shame he could not return home, and so he was resolved to put an end to his own life, and climbing on a shea butter tree, he hanged himself. His friend, hearing of this tragedy, performed for him the last act of kindness by burying his remains under the same tree. On hearing of the king's death, his personal friends followed his example and died with him. Mary committed suicide at Koso, where the king died. Omiran did the same. His cousin committed suicide at Papo, Babayomi at Sele, Obey at Japuta, and Oya, his favorite wife, at Ira. Thus ended the life of this remarkable personage, who once ruled over all the Yorubas and Popos. He was afterward deified, and is still worshipped by all the Yoruba race as the god of thunder and lightning. In every Yoruba and Popo town to this day, whenever there is a flash of lightning followed by a pealed thunder, it is usually to hear from the populace shout of Kawo Kabiyesi, welcome to your majesty, long live the king. Ajaka, his brother, was now recalled from exile, and he once more held the reins of government. Salekodi was the Basharan of this train, now at Ajaka's second reign. King Ajaka, who was dethroned for being too peaceful, was now recalled to the throne. He proved after his reinstatement a totally different man to what he had been before, and showed himself more warlike than even his brother Sango. He led an expedition into the Tapa country. Tradition has it that he employed large and well-trained birds armed with arrows, and after crossing the Niger, they showered down the deadly weapons upon the maternal relations of his brother Sango. What is certain is that the expedition was successful, but by what means it is not really known. But thus it was with the Yorubas, as with all superstitious people, that brave deeds and extraordinary acts of daring are always attributed to the supernatural. He spent the latter days of his years in waging intestine wars with his subjects. He was said to have been engaged in civil wars with 1,060 of his chiefs and princes, among whom were the principal vassals of provincial kings, the Onikoyi, the Oludun, and the Aresa. He had in his service certain medicine man who made charms for him. The following fable was related of him. After his wars, some of these medicine men wept up to him, and humbly prayed to be allowed to return home, but the king refused to grant them leave, fearing lest their service might be required by some other kings, and in that way others might be in possession of the charms they made for him. As they were determined to go home, they showed the king by demonstrative proofs that they made the request simply out of courtesy. Puff! That the king could not detain them. Baku fell down before him and disappeared. Tete Oniru, Abitibiti Onishegun, and Alariba Baishegun performed the same feast and vanished. Edoji threw up a ball of thread which hung suspended in space, and he climbed up it and disappeared. Elere alone remained standing before him. Then said the king to him, Elere, you had better follow the examples of your colleagues and vanish, or I shall wreak my vengeance upon you for thy disobedience. Kill me if you can, replied Elere. The king thereupon ordered him to be decapitated. But the sword was broken in two on the attempt. He then ordered him to be spread, but the spear became bent, and the spearsman's arm withered. He ordered a large stone to be rolled over him to crush him to death, but it fell on him as light as a ball of cotton wool. And the king and the executioners were now at their wits' end, and then it occurred to one of them to plug his earphone. His wife, Ijayin, being prevailed upon, told them that no iron or steel can affect him. Pull off a single blade of grass from the scratch of the house, and with that you can decapitate him. This was done, and the head was struck off. But instead of falling to the ground, it fell into the king's hand, and he involuntarily grasped it. The king tried all his best to drop it off, but to no avail. Any food brought to the king, the head devoured, and drank out the water likewise. The king soon became famished, he was losing flesh, and was really dying from hunger. All the medicine men of every tribe in the kingdom were sent for, to disenchant this alarming phenomenon. As soon as anyone entered, the head would call him by name, tell out the composition of his charms, and then ask, do you think that can affect me? Thus many were baffled until at last came one as Sango. This man at once prostrated at a distance and entreated the head to forbear with him, saying, Who am I to oppose you? In what way am I better than my predecessor, whom you have already followed? I came only in obedience to the king's command, as I dare not refuse to come. The head replied, I will respect you because you are wise, and respect yourself. I heed to your entreaties, then falling suddenly from the king's hand.
Elere's head became a flowing river known at Oyo to this day as Odo Elere.
His wife Ijayin, who disclosed the secret of his strength, was also converted into a stream. But Elere's head said to it, "Thou shalt not flow." Therefore Ijayin became a stagnant pool at Oyo unto this day. From this incident, King Ajaka made it a rule that from henceforth no king should be present in person at an execution. He put to death all the vassal kings 1006 in number, taking a war. The relics of their skulls were put together and are worshipped under the same name of Orishanla to this day. This is the probable origin of that worship. The reign of the mythological heroes abound in garbled forms of sculptural stories, showing as it was remarked in the earlier part of this history that the ancestors of the Yorubas were acquainted with Christianity in the land of their origin. The Ogidigbo drum was introduced into Oyo during this reign. It is of all drums the most inartistic and is totally devoid of any embellishment. It consists of a block of wood about 3 feet in length, hollowed out from the center to about 6 inches of both extremities, and is beaten with a rod. It is used only for the king and the Basharon at the great festival when they dance together at his public appearance. Nothing is known of the end of Ajaka, probably he died in peace. Kindly love, share, comment our YouTube channel. Thanks, we love you.